Donald Trump buys Disney World, and almost overnight, the happiest place on Earth stops feeling the same. The fireworks still explode over the castle. Families still crowd Main Street every night. Children still wear Mickey ears. But little by little, Disney stops feeling like an escape from America and starts feeling exactly like it. At first, the entire thing feels unreal. News helicopters circle over Orlando. Cable news erupts into non-stop coverage. Social media completely melts down. Disney fans panic. Supporters celebrate. Political commentators begin treating a theme park acquisition like a presidential election, because this isn't just another business deal. This is Disney World, one of the most recognizable entertainment properties on Earth, a place millions of people emotionally associate with childhood, nostalgia, fantasy, and escapism. And now it belongs to one of the most polarizing figures in modern American history. That alone would completely change the emotional atmosphere surrounding the park. But once you start looking at the numbers, the story becomes even bigger, because Disney World isn't just a theme park, it's an economic empire. The resort spans roughly 25,000 acres near Orlando, Florida. That's nearly the size of an entire city. Tens of millions of people visit every single year. Disney employs tens of thousands of workers across hotels, transportation systems, restaurants, retail districts, entertainment venues, and resort operations. Entire sections of Florida's economy depend on Disney tourism. Hotels, airports, restaurants, local businesses, transportation infrastructure. Millions of tourists flow through Orlando every year, largely because Disney exists, which means if someone like Donald Trump somehow gained control over Disney World, the economic impact alone would be enormous. And naturally, the first question people would ask is, how could he even afford it? Because while Donald Trump is extremely wealthy, Disney itself is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Buying the entire Walt Disney Company outright would realistically be almost impossible. But Disney World specifically, that becomes a much more interesting conversation, because massive acquisitions at that level are rarely done by one person using cash alone. They happen through investors, partnerships, private equity groups, licensing agreements, management structures, political relationships, and massive financing deals. In other words, influence becomes just as important as money. And regardless of what people think about Donald Trump politically, one thing is undeniable: he understands spectacle, and spectacle creates attention, which creates money. That's why the first phase of Trump-owned Disney World would probably look shockingly successful. Attendance would likely explode initially. Supporters from around the country would flood into the parks just to witness the cultural event in person. Media coverage would become non-stop. Every redesign would dominate headlines. Every controversy would become viral content. Every statement would trigger another online war. And economically, Florida might actually experience a major short-term boom. Tourism surges, hotels completely booked, massive merchandise sales, luxury developments expanding around the parks, corporate partnerships pouring money into Orlando. At first glance, it might genuinely look like a business masterclass. And honestly, that's what makes the entire scenario uncomfortable, because the transformation would probably begin in exciting ways before becoming something much stranger, because over time, Disney World itself would slowly start changing, not all at once, not through some dramatic overnight collapse, but gradually, subtly. The atmosphere would begin feeling different, more corporate, more political, more performative. Luxury branding would become impossible to ignore. VIP culture would intensify. Massive sponsorship deals would dominate entire sections of the park. Exclusive experiences for wealthy visitors would continue expanding. Media spectacle would slowly start replacing emotional warmth, and eventually, people would begin realizing something important. important. Disney no longer felt emotionally neutral. That's the real transformation. Because Disney's power was never just about rides. It was about emotional escape. For generations, Disney World represented a place disconnected from the outside world. A place where politics, stress, division, and modern chaos temporarily disappeared. Parents brought their children there to experience wonder. Adults revisited it because it reminded them of happier versions of themselves. Disney wasn't just entertainment, it was emotional infrastructure. And once someone as politically divisive as Donald Trump takes ownership of that environment, neutrality disappears almost instantly. Every change becomes symbolic, every redesign becomes political. Every branding decision becomes national news. Even harmless things begin carrying ideological weight. That's when the emotional atmosphere of the park truly starts shifting, not in the buildings themselves, but in the feeling surrounding them. And eventually, the crowds would begin changing too. Some long-time Disney fans would stop going entirely. Others would continue visiting while quietly admitting something felt different now. Supporters would proudly embrace the new version of the park. Critics would see it as the commercialization and politicization of childhood nostalgia. Employees would get trapped in the middle of constant cultural conflict, and social media would amplify every controversy until Disney World stopped feeling like a fantasy destination and started feeling like a permanent national debate. That's what makes this idea darker than people expect, because Disney represents something emotionally important to millions of people. Watching it slowly become absorbed into America's non-stop political and media machine would feel less like a business acquisition and more like watching part of American culture fundamentally change in real time. And the strangest part is that the park might actually become even more profitable during the process. That's the disturbing part, because modern outrage generates unbelievable amounts of attention, and attention generates money. Politics, social media, cable news, corporate branding, everything competes for emotional reaction now. And in this scenario, Disney World slowly becomes part of that machine too. The controversy itself becomes profitable. The division becomes profitable. The spectacle becomes profitable. At that point, the real story stops being Donald Trump. It becomes about modern America itself, about whether any major institution can remain culturally neutral anymore, about whether nostalgia can survive commercialization, about whether fantasy can survive politics. And maybe the most unsettling part of all is this: people would probably adapt faster than they think, because massive cultural shifts rarely happen through dramatic collapse. They happen through normalization, one small change at a time. A new sponsorship, a luxury expansion, higher ticket prices, more branding, more media attention, more exclusivity. At first, every individual change feels manageable, but eventually people look around and realize the emotional feeling of Disney has changed completely. The fireworks still explode over the castle, the rides still operate, families still take pictures on Main Street, but emotionally, something feels colder now, more commercial, more performative, less sincere. And maybe that's because Disney was never designed to survive ownership tied this closely to political identity, because the moment fantasy becomes ideological, the illusion weakens, and once the illusion weakens, the emotional connection changes too. That's the dangerous part, because Disney World isn't just physical infrastructure, it's emotional memory. Millions of people attach childhood experiences, relationships, nostalgia, and comfort to that place. And once politics fully enters that emotional space, people stop interacting with it the same way. That's why this scenario feels strangely believable, because modern America already feels like this sometimes: louder, more divided, more commercial commercialized, more performative, and if Donald Trump ever bought Disney World, that transformation would probably become impossible to ignore. So here's the real question. If Disney World became more profitable than ever, but slowly lost the emotional warmth that made generations of people love it in the first place, would people actually care? Or would America simply normalize the change the same way it always does? And honestly, that's what makes this idea so unsettling, because the question isn't whether Disney would survive, it's whether people would even notice the magic disappearing until it was already gone. So let me know in the comments, would a Trump-owned Disney World actually succeed? Or would that be the moment Disney finally loses what made it special in the first place?